Righty. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today for our second workshop of this series with Kim Box on startup board development. So we're really excited to have you here in the space. My name is Cameron Law, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Carlson Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And here at the Carlson Center, we serve as a regional hub and platform for providing approachable and accessible entrepreneurial education, support, and community to enable startup founders of all backgrounds to start and scale their businesses. And today, this workshop falls under our Discover set of programs, with really giving you some of those tools and frameworks you need to be a successful startup founder and one that can take your business to the next level. So we're in good hands today with Kim Box, who's one of our Carlson Center Advisory Board members. I'm going to read some of her bio here because she is definitely impressive, and we're lucky to have her here today leading this workshop. But Kim Box is an independent director on the board of American River Bank, which is on the NASDAQ, and is a chair of the Finance and Capital Committee and a member of the Audit Committee. She also serves as an independent director on the McGrath Rent Corp. And a board of directors where she is the chair of the Nominations, Governance, and Compensation Committee. She has significant board and executive leadership experience across multiple disciplines, including IT, strategic leadership, transformation, global operations, and much more. She also has had her experience in startups, where she was the former CEO and president at Gatekeeper Innovation, which is a local healthcare company that creates products to keep medication safe. While during her tenure as a CEO, she grew revenues by 500%. So definitely keep an eye out for, an ear out for some of her ways to succeed in that space. And she also was the former HP vice president, where she led $1 billion in global organization across 100 locations. So we're in good hands here, and hopefully her proudest moment is serving on the Carlson Center Advisory Board. But no, nonetheless, we're in good hands, and we're excited to have you all in the space. So I'll turn it over to you, Kim, and appreciate your time and experience sharing.
Yeah, thanks, Cameron, and thanks for being here. I know that I'll try to keep this conversation interesting, and I hope that if you have questions, it's a small enough group that if you have questions along the way, Cameron's going to help field those questions so that I can kind of truck along here, and then we can be kind of interactive as we go. So last week we did a session on just about the board and looking at the board at different stages and things like that. And today we're going to look at what is, board meetings and who attends them and that type of thing. So we're going to, let me see if I can get this. Oops, hold on a second. How come it's not? Cameron, you can see my slide, right?
Yep, you're good.
Oh, it's interesting because mine does not show in slide format, and I don't know why. Hold on a second.
No worries. Yeah, while you're tackling that, I feel free to throw your questions in the chat or use the raise hand feature. I'll be able to help field those coming on in, so that will help there. And then if you want to get familiar with the chat feature, feel free to share where you're joining us from and what you're interested in learning here today with Kim. So back to you, Kim.
Okay, great. All right, so we're gonna cover just some basics about board meetings, what's on a typical calendar throughout the year, and topics, an example of a board agenda, who attends the board meetings, what is a board packet, and just a few comments on a board versus the advisory board and what the differences might be there. So basically on the board, and by the way, I'm really approaching this from an early stage perspective. I mean, I've been on, small startup board, couple of boards, as well as, private company, and then, those that are public. But this is really geared towards a smaller, there's so much more information if we were talking about public company boards, and that's not really the intention of this. So basically, it's really important to have regular board meetings. It's easy when you're a founder and it's a small company to not really be disciplined about having board meetings, but it's important that certain legal agreements, and once you're incorporated, it's important that certain legal agreements get officially agreed to, even if it's just Well, if it's just yourself, it's going to be, pretty easy. But if you typically have another founder, or maybe an investor, or another person that's like, sometimes you'll see two founders, or the CEO and COO as founders, and that type of thing, to at least have a regular set schedule throughout the year to look at stock plans, your cap table, and what needs to be approved, and where you're going, whether you need to increase your option pool, that type of thing. The other thing that's important that I didn't put as a bullet here, but I wanted to mention, is that at some point, if you get interest from another company or another group to acquire you, many times they want to look at your board documentation and your board minutes. And so if you haven't been having regular board meetings, it'll be hard to articulate all the decisions that you've made and have done them in the proper way. So getting in a discipline, whether it's, and your bylaws pretty much dictate the cadence of, you have to have an annual meeting. There's a few things you have to do. So number of meetings, typically this has become pretty typical of any board of directors, even on the public side. One meeting a quarter plus a strategic planning meeting would be what I would consider to be a minimum. I have been on small company boards where we've met twice a year because we're meeting every day. So it's like, why do we have to have a special meeting? But we still would do the discipline to make sure we're getting those meetings in and discussing the things at the right cadence. And I'll go over kind of what that looks like. Meeting length, obviously, it really depends on the agenda. For a small company, if you're just reviewing performance and approving things, obviously an hour is fine. But if you're doing more strategic discussions and engaging your board in that way, it can be longer. Meeting materials. So you create a board packet, which I'm going to go over, and you need to send that out 48 hours in advance. That's a rule of thumb, but there are some bylaws that dictate that it has to happen that way, that you also have to, when you have, investors and shareholders, whatnot, you also need to do certain notices in advance to let them know there's going to be a meeting if they're involved. So again, those are dictated by bylaws and different corporate documents that you need to be aware of. But this is pretty typical that for a small company, 2 days is probably enough to review the materials, but most people on a board want the materials a week in advance, not because it takes a week to review them, but if you have other meetings going on or you're out of town, a week in advance gives you the weekend usually to look through the materials. And then meeting rules, the best practice across the board. I've not seen any board that doesn't, regardless of how small or how big, that doesn't use Robert's Rules of Order. Although I've read a little bit in preparing for this that, that could be out of fashion in some places. You just basically need to be able to have a way to show that there was a vote and who voted and how the results were. But I'm kind of guessing that most people know what Robert's Rules of Order are. If you don't, there's a book. I mean, it was created in the 1800s. It's been around forever. And, it's the typical, when you have something that has to be voted on, like approving the minutes needs to be voted from the previous meeting, someone will move a motion and someone will second it. And then you call for everyone in favor, say aye, anyone opposed, nay. And then there's, someone might abstain because they weren't at the meeting, so they didn't have the ability to review the minutes or recuse themselves. So you can go look that up if you want more detail about all the different Robert's rules, but most people have, if you've probably seen it, played out in some way, shape, or form. And then meeting place, before COVID, it was pretty common that people would come to the company headquarters, and then any directors, especially for a small company that aren't local, they're national or whatever, it would be very common for people to dial in via video or teleconference was even more common. Obviously now everybody's on video. And I've heard of very few meetings, even in the public space, that have gone back to physical meetings. And honestly, I don't know. I think it's going to morph into a hybrid of sorts where there'll be a strategic planning meeting once a year, and then there'll be other meetings that continue to be on Zoom and type of platforms. But really, it has to be flexible so that you want to get these high caliber people and they're very busy. You need to make accommodations. So calendar topics. So there's if you're looking at a quarterly meeting, and this is, I want to mention, this is my opinion, my experience. And if we had 2 or 3 other people here that were giving their experience, it might be different, but it would be pretty similar. At this is very high level. So you have this quarterly meeting, and each of the meetings you're reviewing the previous quarter minutes. Obviously, that's part of it. But when you meet in January, you're going to be reviewing the previous quarter, and in January you also review the previous year. So one other thing about the meeting timing, it usually happens in the 3rd or 4th week of the month, because you have to get the financials to settle. So you don't typically see a board meeting at the 1st week or 2nd week of a month, unless it's rolling to the next month. Also, in the 1st quarter, you might be reviewing the CEO's results and any kind of bonus plan. In a private company, in a small company, you don't typically see a lot of committees because it's a very small group. It might be the chair, or a board member that has been designated to analyze and review. But it still needs to happen where you're reviewing the results. Now, if you're a founder and it's you and another founder, you discuss what the affordability is and where you're at, and maybe you're just doing stock or something like that. But anyways, typically this would be when it would happen. And then in the next, and then approval of annual stock awards, that can happen any quarter, but I just threw it in as, this is something that might happen at the beginning of the year, where you're looking at your employees and saying, do we need to, do more incentive? And you pick a timing in the year so everybody knows what to expect. And then the 2nd quarter, again, you're reviewing the Q1. You might be reviewing funding strategies. Somewhere along the line, you're going to be looking at your capital and what you need to do. It could happen the quarter before, but I'm just placing it there as something you need to do routinely throughout the year. And then annual shareholder meetings. Many of the boards that I'm involved in have their shareholder meetings in May and June. It doesn't have to happen then. It can be other times, but it needs to happen at least once a year. And then in the 3rd quarter, you might be obviously reviewing Q2, and then looking at strategic planning. Most groups I've been involved in, strategic planning starts happening where you're reviewing the plans in September. You might finalize them in October and November, so you hit the ground running in January. And that's an important board activity. And then in the 4th quarter, again, analyzing comp plan for the CEO and other officers, and however it's set up for that company. And then also setting up the meeting schedule for the next year. I found, because I was running this small company, and it was really easy to, especially at the beginning when I was, was still very, very small, it was easy to get in the habit of, oh, we need to do a board meeting, let's find a time. And we just weren't being that consistent. But once we went to setting it up each quarter, putting it on the calendar for an entire year, it helps everybody get in that mindset of that's how it's going to happen, and to not schedule, get conflicts with calendars. And if you're involved in several boards like I am, having a schedule is really important, because you need to be able to accommodate many different things. So that's kind of the calendar topics. I mean, you can imagine the board agenda is pretty straightforward. I also put on here basically that, the CEO works with the chair to create the agenda. The CEO probably, and their team, depending on how many people are in the company, prepares the materials and then sends it out to the board in advance. The chair is responsible for facilitating the meeting, and the minutes are kept. I put by corporate secretary, but if you create a corporation here in California or anywhere, there's certain officers that you designate, and it can, it can be in the bylaws how that works. So it's kind of different depending on how the company is structured. But even if they're not an official corporate secretary, you need to have somebody designated as the minute taker. Many times it's an attorney that you've roped into do pro bono on your startup, which is a really great way to do it. And they keep things really official and really well documented. Someone can sign the minutes with the terminology acting as secretary. So that's, the CEO can become the person that does that. It can be anybody on the board and or designated there at some point. but somebody has to do it. And then just the agenda flow, usually the chair calls to order, there's an approval of the minutes, and you discuss whether there was any changes, and some people might say, well, this was represented wrong or whatever, and then you have to say approval based on these changes. And then there's typically a CEO report, a section called CEO report, review, whatever, and they're reviewing the performance. This one I just picked an agenda that is in January, so you're reviewing the previous year. The CFO might, if there's no CFO, then it would be the CEO probably reviewing the financials, and then some biz dev sales type report out, product development, and then looking at key priorities for the coming year. You also might be reviewing and approving a stock plan. And then something that's really important is the executive session. Now, if you're a very small company and the board is only 2 people, it's really not going to happen. But if the board's bigger, let's say it's 5 people, and there's the CEO, and then there's the board, which might comprise a couple of investors and other shareholders type thing. And this is more common as the board gets bigger and the company gets bigger. But I still want to bring it up because at some point it's really important to have these executive sessions. And typically what the executive session is, it can be the CEO, and so all the staff would be gone, out of the room, and it could be the CEO and the rest of the board. And then there could be another level where the CEO is not in the room, and it's the rest of the board that wants to discuss things they're concerned about that they feel they need to, discuss openly. And then typically the chair or maybe a lead director will then have a meeting with the CEO, typically right after, because everybody knows that there might be things to discuss. And it's a good practice on any board to always have an executive session. I've been on a lot of boards, and if all of a sudden someone says, we need to have an executive session, and it's not a general practice, then it's like, oh crap, what's going on? Something's wrong, But if you have them regularly, even if the people leave the room and the person that's leading the executive session just says, does anybody have anything to say? Many times it's like, nope, nothing. All right, we're done, But it creates this air of contention if it's not a regular thing. So I always just want to mention that it's a good practice.
Kim, there was a question from the last slide. All good stuff was, could you please give some more specifics on the performance? So like what kind of topics or KPIs when you're thinking at the board level? So I think it might be board performance or something.
Oh, okay. So it's probably obviously financials. And, I can follow up with an example of a board deck. It would have been a lot of slides, so I didn't add it in here, but I can do a mock-up of a operational review if that would be helpful. But typically you'd have financials, and it would be, I like seeing graphs because I think it's easy just to say we're going in the right direction or we're not. But it would be each of the quarters and what was the plan and what was the actual result. So look at the delta. And then on the financials, it would be, revenue. Are we on track on revenue? What is our gross margin, cost of goods sold and gross margin? And then what is our operating expense? And then what is our net profit and, net margin, to see how we're doing. Are we making money? Are we losing money? Also looking at the balance sheet to see what kind of cash reserves are on hand, and then a cash flow statement. And this cash flow statement in a early stage company is just probably one of the most critical things, because even if you have made money or haven't made money, you need to have money in order to keep going. So doing a cash flow statement and having that, people are familiar with the word pro forma, where you have when you're looking for investment, they'll ask for a 24-month pro forma. What do you think you're going to bring in? What cash do you have? Also, you hear a lot about burn rate. So, how much cash are we burning? How long, given our current expenses, how long can we stay in business? So having that as part of the operational review is really important. And then other areas, so for the company that I was running, Gatekeeper is a medical products company, we would do a product development review, and we'd look at the roadmap, and we'd see, are we on track with the products that we want to introduce, and even do, here's what the product looks like. And it was a small company, so we were pretty much doing that, but usually there's other people in the boardroom, so you want to give them an update as well. And then business development, what are some big customers that you're bringing on? Who have you brought on from the last quarter? What are some new customers and new opportunities and big business development that you're doing? And review the sales. Are the sales on track? And then operationally, looking at, if you're a product company, what's our inventory? How are we doing in terms of anything related to the facility, of how long it takes to ship? Are we collecting on the invoices? Just a whole operational flow. If you're an internet company, you might be doing things like, social media metrics, or number of views on the website. So it would be some key indicators. And we had this KPI Google sheet that the team filled out. Everybody on the team had different areas. That's a good way to get accountability, obviously. So everybody would put those numbers in every month, and then at the end of the quarter, I would go in and review them, and we'd prepare them for the board meeting. So let's see, I hit the operations, the sales, marketing, biz dev type area, product development. And there might be other areas that you look at, like if you're really big growth mode, you might be looking at HR and how your hiring's going and things like that, employee retention. So those are just some examples of what would be in the performance review. The other thing that would be in that review is fundraising. So if you're out raising money, angel investors, VC type money, whatever, you want to keep a hit list of what you're doing and what you brought in and how it's converting, and when you think you're going to bring in the dollars you need to sustain your current plan. So those are just some examples of what you'd see in that review, which is why you see.
I love it. Great information. There's a couple follow-ons or just additional questions. And then I'll take these. I think there's 3, and then we'll pause there, and then so Kim can continue on. This one should be quick. Does the chair document the executive session, or is this confidential?
The chair, usually the chair is not the one doing the minutes, if you will. It's somebody that's been designated, or it could be the chair. I mean, whoever you designate. You do need to document the session, but you don't. And probably a thing that would be helpful would be for me to provide a example of minutes. I should have put that in here, but you would see things like operational review was presented by the CEO, Kim Box. There was discussion and questions and answers ensued, and that would be it. You wouldn't say, someone said this, someone said that. You don't want to document too much. You want to document enough to show that you were on top of it and you were doing your duty to review. But you gotta be really careful what you put down. So especially when it comes to projections and things like that, you don't want to put. And as a matter of fact, in our minutes, we never included the operational board packet that had all the graphs and all the trends and all the results. We did the minutes, and that was not part of the minutes, which was by design through our legal counsel. Said no, just put the minutes about what you're doing and what decisions were made. And so you have to document things like you voted on the shareholder. As a matter of fact, I've seen it 2 ways. Some boards have documented that the motion was moved by John and it was seconded by Karen, and all in favor, then all the A's, whatever number of them. And then I've seen it also documented that a motion carried and was voted on positively, and that no naming of who first and seconded. And what our attorney told us was, whatever you do, keep doing the same thing. So if you start by saying John moved the motion and Karen seconded it, then for the rest of time, you have to do that same thing. So as little as you can do with still upholding. This is why it's important to have counsel on your, if you can get them on your board, especially when they do it pro bono, because it's too expensive if it costs money. But you know, you get all those little nuances dialed in.
Great insights there. So there's two quick questions. I think you answered some of Peyton's question, but if the CEO runs the meeting, who runs and moderates the executive session? And then afterwards, if there's action items, who tracks those? And I'm guessing the minutes is kind of that point of truth.
Yeah, and I think the executive session, many times the meeting is closed, so there's no minutes. It's really just like a safe zone, if you will, to have discussions. So it doesn't really need to be documented if you've adjourned the meeting. If there's voting that takes place during that executive session, which typically wouldn't happen because the CEO is typically also on the board. If the CEO leaves, it would be the chair that would run that executive session. And if the CEO is also the chair, one of the really good practices to have on a board is to have what's called a lead director. And a lead director is designated as someone who's more independent than the chair or the CEO, if they're one and the same, or they're both founders. So there'd be someone called a lead director that would hold that session. And they might even hold it with other directors that are called independent directors, meaning their salaries aren't based, like they're making a decision on salary. You don't want the person that's salary to be making that decision. That could be a conflict. Again, when you're really small, you get to control everything because it's just you. But when you get bigger and you add more people to your board, then there are some practices that need to be put in place to make it work. I hope that makes sense.
And the last question, and I think this is what NPS stands for, but do companies measure Net Promoter Score?
Some companies do, if it's relevant to their business.
Yeah.
Not everybody has that same type. I mean, you see it a lot in consulting and really high touch, but if you're something where you're doing a product and you're licensing it to another group, you wouldn't have an NPS score necessarily. Your customer base might be very small. If you're going through distributors, NPS score isn't as relevant, but if you're an internet company or a consulting company or some high touch consumer company, then I think Net Promoter Score is a really popular metric right now.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for the questions, and thank you, Kim, for the answers.
Oh yeah, no problem. So anyway, so this is just an example of a typical agenda, but again, you know, it could vary different. There could be a small company that doesn't want the staff in the meeting, and they just want to, you know, do the whole meeting themselves, the CEO. But typically when you get a little bit bigger, it's nice to give those people some visibility and gives them accountability to be on the hot seat in the boardroom. That's for sure. So who attends the board meetings? So mandatory, obviously the CEO and the board members. They're the primary attendees. They have to be there. And most companies, the CEO is also on the board. Not always, but I haven't seen one that isn't. And you know, people will say I become the CEO, but I also want a board seat. In a small company, really small company where you're bringing on a new CEO, you might decide, no, I'm a founder. I'm gonna not have them have a vote. We'll keep it very separate, but it's not very common. Most people negotiate that. And then typically you'll see the staff come in to do the operational review, and the operational review they'll come in for the review. And I know for me, I always made it such that everybody just came in, so we weren't having come in, come out. It's too disruptive. I'd have that done at the beginning possibly, so that when that part's done, the staff can leave. You definitely, if your company's getting bigger and you're having other staff members, it depends on the company, and it depends on the board members. If you have certain board members that like to say things in a way that are very abrasive, then it might be hard for the staff to be in there. You know, I mean, that's just human nature. And most investors that I've run across, they don't care. They're gonna, and I don't mean that to be bad. I just mean they're gonna tell you straight out. And if you have your staff continue on in the meeting when there's some really hard discussions to be made, it might be more difficult. So that's one of the reasons. That's one reason. The other reason why the staff leaves is just it's confidential. There's information that Only the board should be reviewing, for instance, stock awards. You don't want everybody in the team looking at that. I mean, I've heard some companies make that public, but that's pretty rare. And then if there isn't a corporate secretary, you need to designate someone to do the minutes. And I've seen where there could be somebody that has a legal background that takes on that role. I mean, I've done that role in one of the small companies that I was with. I just did the minutes. I had a template that was from other minutes so that I didn't have to regurgitate the legal mumbo jumbo and how to word it. I already knew because we had 2 years of minutes, so I could use those. But that's the things you do as a really, really small company. You got to save money, right? And then sometimes, like I said earlier, there's outside counsel. So an attorney, many of the law firms will take on a certain percentage of startup companies, especially if they've been working with the same entrepreneurs for years. They've seen success, so they know that they'll eventually have a lucrative arrangement, but they'll take on a small number of startup companies. And that's been my experience. I've had really wonderful local people here in Sacramento that have come on as counsel, where you don't actually pay them, but they some of it's accrued for future, some of it is just pro bono. So, and they're the best people to take minutes because they're pro at it. And then occasionally you might have consultants for specific topics. I mean, you might have somebody that you want to come in or somebody that you're working with that's a big contract that you want the board to have visibility to. As a partner, there might be other times when you have a different staff member come in and do a presentation. And it's really at the discretion of the board, something that they find to be something that is needed, but you have to keep things as efficient as possible. So you're not going to just have a whole cast of people. There is a board I'm on it's not an early stage company, but it's not a big company, it's not a big public company. As a matter of fact, I don't know if that was on my bio. I need to add it. It's a local company here called Applied Science. And they have the board members, which is a pretty small number of people. I think there's only 5 of us, including the CEO. And then, and by the way, it's always good to have an odd number if you didn't catch that on the previous session that we did. But they also have 2 attorneys that attend. And one of them is one that they have for one reason, and the other one is from another reason. And then they also have this really, really big partner for something they're developing. And that person comes to the board meetings, not for the whole time, but the CEO feels like it's important for certain parts of the board meeting to have those folks in there. He's super collaborative. So he likes, that kind of attention to what's going on. And so it can be any way that you want it to be. You just need to be careful when you discuss confidential things that you have the people, the right people in the room. And we always do an executive session, even though there's rarely something that we need to talk about. So it's just, like I said, it's just a really good practice. Okay, let's see. I hope I'm not boring everybody. This is pretty nuts and bolts type of discussion here, but so the board packet, again, I mentioned that you want to send it out at least 48 hours, 2 days in advance. People get pretty cranky if they don't have time to review it. I know I do when I've been in that situation. Everybody's busy, so getting it out ahead of time. And that's why it's important to not schedule the board meeting in your calendar. You got to give yourself enough time to settle the financials, analyze the financials, do the comparisons, and then have the packet ready, the packet ready to go out. So there's an agenda, there's an operational review portion of it. The financials, even if you have the financials in the operational review as kind of the highlights and where you met, where you missed, that kind of thing. Every single board packet has a P&L statement and a balance sheet. And then the plan versus actual, sometimes it's automated depending on how sophisticated the company is. Sometimes you have to create that. And that plan versus actual might be in the operational review under the finance section, but the P&L statement and the balance sheet, I mean, that's something that I just insist on. And if I can get it raw straight from the financial system, all the better. It doesn't need to be something that went through some form and then you got it. You want it straight and just exactly what it is in detail. Because if you're serving on a board, you're responsible for the soundness of that board. So you really need to look through it and see if we're doing well or in trouble or whatever. And then some other things that might end up in the packet are strategic planning, maybe the planning materials, maybe the update throughout the year on how you're doing. Committee updates. I haven't talked a lot about committees because in a small company, a small startup, it's pretty unusual to have committees. In a public company, it's required that you have an audit committee, a compensation committee, and a nomination/governance committee or governance committee. But for a really small company, that would not make sense. And so, but as you grow and you get closer to acquisition or IPO, certainly IPO, those standard committees will be a part of it, and committee updates. Most committee updates, and depending on what it is, are verbal. There's like a verbal and maybe a set of information that might have to, certain times of the year, you have to approve certain things. But and then annual report. I mean, even if you don't even have a board, you have to do an annual report especially, I know in the Delaware companies, you have to submit an annual report each year, and it's nothing like you'd see the big formal report from like Johnson & Johnson or something. It's financials basically, and just what the business is and everything. So there's an annual report that has to take place. And if you have a board that you're running, then you'll want to get that annual report, first of all, so the board sees it. And secondly, when you have your shareholder meeting, that's basically what you're going to do, is go through an annual report, whatever it includes. It can, the minimum's financials, but it could include many other things. And then I just put seasonal reviews and special topics. I mean, this list could be very long in terms of like, when I was going through a bunch of agendas in preparing for this, and just, I mean, like one meeting we had reviewed a 401k plan for the employees. Another time we reviewed who was doing our payroll. We switched from ADP to TriNet, and there's just a whole bunch of different things that you would have during the year. We had a supplier in China, and then we were looking at one here locally. So there was some analysis on that, so it just depends on what's going on with the business and how relevant it is to the board of directors and what you might need from them. If there's no decision to be made, you might want to just keep them updated. Communicating and updating is really important, so there's no surprises. Are there any questions, Cameron, before I move to the next?
I do not see any, but I can
Okay.
see if there's any quick questions if you want to raise your hand. If not, going once.
This is pretty straightforward stuff.
Yeah.
And I think we're doing good on time, so we might.
I think Pei-Chin might have a question. He unmuted.
I do. Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand.
No worries.
So what kind of decisions need to be made at the board level, and what kind of decisions can the CEO just simply make?
So there are, a lot of it is dictated by your bylaws. But the board level, I mean, typically things like, definitely anything related to stock. So if you want to increase the option pool, it has to be approved by the board. Actually, that one has to be approved if you have investors as well, but that depends on how your note was written. So a lot of it depends on the legal structure that you have. There's not a ton of things that need to, I mean, the strategic plan, depending on how your board is operating, you could come in and review the strategic plan and have the board approve it. But legally, I'm not so sure that needs to take place. But definitely anything related to shares, if there's increases in the CEO's salary or comp plan, that is a typical thing that needs to be done by the board. I'm going through my mind here on various things that approving the financials, even that the CEO can do a report on that. Again, I think it depends on the structure of the board. So if you were a founder, which I know you are, because I know you, but anyways, if you were a founder and you had another founder or someone else that was on the board, and then you had a handful of investors on the board, then that would then I would look at the bylaws and see what you're obligated to do. You know, the bylaws will state even voting rights and things like that. Yeah, there's certain, sometimes people get on a board and have no rights. So I've had two investors on the board that were members of the board, but were observation only. So the board really didn't have to get agreement from them. So I'm sorry to be so kind of, not nailing it down, but it really does depend. But I know for sure that the stock and how it's structured and increasing or approving someone getting stock or warrants or any of that needs to be approved by the board. That's to me, that's, especially for a small company, that's like the biggest thing that needs to happen.
Okay, thank you.
So it sounds like the bylaws are a key component to guiding the board going forward. So as you're building those, have real intentionality, as those are the guidelines that ultimately dictate how you're going to be executing on it. So.
Yeah, I found that out the hard way a long time ago. And I will never join a board that I can't have access to the bylaws and read them. I mean, there's some bylaws that pretty much say the chair has all the power, which that's not always how it is, and so in certain circumstances when votes need to be taking place. Anyways, there are bylaws that are very company friendly and there's bylaws that are very investor friendly. If the bylaws are created or instilled upon through a big investor firm, then there might be things in there that are difficult for the founders and CEO. So anyway, so it really depends. I've heard that term. It's company friendly versus it's not company friendly, and that applies probably more or less to investment. When you get investment, that's a whole nother section. But anyways, so board versus advisory board. So the board, we went over this last week, but the board's role is of a fiduciary, which duty of care, duty of loyalty. They have to act in good faith and not in self-interest. They're doing oversight and governance. So they need to make sure no wrongdoing is taking place. And trust me, it's a very serious business, no matter if you're a public or private company. And their overall responsibility is to uphold the shareholder value. And then on the advisory board, their role is, role of advisor and coach, connections, and they're committing to that, but they don't have a legal responsibility to the company. They're more peripheral. So on the board side, the board is going to be regular meetings with legal rights to the information, financials, legal documents, company performance, anything about the company. They have a right to know, to make sure that there's no wrongdoing, or it's not even wrongdoing. It could be that something's gone wrong and the board's going to be responsible regardless. Once you incorporate, it's no longer really, you might have the largest share, but an incorporated company is its own entity, So the board at the board meeting role is really to uphold those fiduciary responsibilities. In order to do that, you have to know what's going on. So there's rights that the board members have. They have rights to confidential information. Any company that I'm on the board of, if there's something I want to know, I can ask and get that information to do my responsibility. And they're also responsible for oversight at the board meeting. So during the board meeting, any board member is going to be able to ask questions, dig deeper, try to understand where things are going. In a small company, it has a different feel, and it depends on what kind of investor money you've taken in. And if you have big investors on your board, it could really change kind of the dynamic. But for a lot of really small companies, it's really about how can we help? What can we do? And it's not a working board in the sense that they're working for the company, but it could be much more involved. As a matter of fact, I just heard someone mention this the other day, because people are on public company boards like I am, and then sometimes they'll get on even large private companies and they're like, wait a minute, what's all these calls? Why am I getting all these calls? Why are they? Because in a public company, you go to the meeting, you digest the information and you you have the meeting, and it's very formal on how you do that oversight. And you don't get involved in the day-to-day business. I mean, very rarely, unless you've been asked to, and then it's a committee and it's a this and a that. But on a private company, it could be very different. But on the advisory board side, and you know, the word advisory board, some people, usually it's called, you know, you become an advisor, or they might say you're going to be on the advisory board, but it may not actually be a regular set of meetings. I've seen it in a couple different ways. It could be just, I mean, I know for myself, I've had advisors where they have such different backgrounds that I may not have a meeting with them all together, but I might call one for investor stuff. I might call another for, you know, connections in healthcare or something. I mean, you know, it just depends. So it could be a meeting or it could be one-on-one, but they have to commit to be there throughout the year. And one of the advisory contracts that I used when I was running Gatekeeper, it had the terminology that you had to meet with the company at least 3 times a year. And that didn't mean you had to be coming to the company or be in a meeting with a group of people. You could just be like, I need to have access to you at least 3 times, you know, and they're getting compensation. They're getting some equity for their roles. So you want to make sure you take advantage of them. But they don't have rights. They can't attend the board meeting, and I would not suggest, you don't want any more people there than you need, than you have to have in your board meetings. And they don't have rights to any kind of confidential information. I'm on the advisory board for the company that I was the CEO of, and I don't get all the information that I used to get in the board meetings, and that's fine. It's just not appropriate. It's a different kind of information. It's, you know, here's where we are needing connections. Here's where we're trying to grow. Do you have any ideas how we can do this? And they are doing an excellent job. The new CEO, Kevin, has created an advisory board where they meet every month. I'm like, wow, that's pretty impressive. You get these people to meet every single month like that. And they're all from all different industries, and they love it. A lot of advisors want to meet with other advisors. They like the network. They like creating this network. And it's very effective. I've been really impressed with how asking like a question about how do we get some legislation going, and then somebody who's from the DEA goes, oh, I have an idea on that, who's not even part of that. You know, you have this other person who's part of government, you know, lobbying or whatever. So anyways, it's interesting how you can create different things. But so they don't have any approval requirements. They're not going to approve anything. And the structure varies greatly. As I've said, it's not always the same. It's can be very different. I've seen people put advisors on to their company where it's just on the slide. I've done that myself. I've gotten people to agree to be an advisor, and maybe I've asked them, you know, got some access to them, but really having a big high-powered person as part of your advisor slide is really useful. So let's see, we are almost done. So just a few parting thoughts. I mean, these are just, you're probably thinking, well, of course, you know, be consistent, be on time, be planful, be proactive, be organized. But I'm telling you, when you're, and I don't have to tell all of you this, when you're a startup company or early stage, you're running a mile a minute. And it's not always easy to have that kind of discipline for something that feels like you got to do it. So it's a good practice to begin with, to keep these things, you know, keep your agenda really tight, be on time, be planful about what's going to be there, be consistent, and communicate. One thing that I don't think people in general like, but directors especially, don't like surprises. So if you have a board meeting cadence and during the middle of the quarter, you find out something really challenging has happened, especially if it's going to get in the news or something like that, then you need to alert your board. And whether it's a personal call, if you don't want it to be something that's written down in any kind of electronics, then you call people and you talk to them about what's going on. Or if there's a challenge you're having, you don't want to wait to the board meeting and you want to get some help from one of your board members. You know, to me, that's why they're there. That smaller company I mentioned that I'm on the board of, Applied Science, they're a blood collection technology, and some other healthcare things. You know, I'll get a call from the CEO, and because I used to be on the board of the Red Cross for 10 years, and he'll call me and say, hey, what about this? What about that? Can you introduce me to somebody here? And so, you don't have to wait till the formal board meeting to do that. And also the last thought is, sorry, I'm gonna cough here. The last thought is to utilize the board meetings to work through tough challenges. I mean, the mechanical operational side of the board meeting can be really fast. As a matter of fact, there's something called a consent agenda where you can just have the material be very consistent, and the board could read the material and then acknowledge, and if they have to approve it, can approve it without any discussion if it's just something they need to know. It's called you've probably heard of this consent agenda. And then you leave more time for what you really want the people on your board, which is strategic discussions. And people really like that. They like feeling like, they can contribute and help shape things. So anyways, and we haven't even talked about board dynamics. I mean, if there's any other questions, we can go through them, but sometimes it can be really challenging with different personalities. I've had a board where there was an investor that somehow got on the board, and he was not a nice person. Let me tell you, every single board meeting, it was just like, oh my goodness. But you have to work through those things. You have to kind of figure out, how do I maybe be proactive with that person. Eventually I won the person over and we went on, but he was more upset because he wasn't getting enough information. So he just thought the worst. And I'm very partner centric, very communicate. And if you have board members that are either silent observers or investors and they don't know what's going on, and they might just think that, it's not going well. So that's something to think about as well. But anyway, so that's basically the materials. And any other discussion or questions? Again, this is my experience. There's so many different things that can be happening in various boards. So if somebody else has a different experience they want to share, that's fine too.
Thank you, Kim, for leading us in this second workshop. Just such great content. We have about 4 or 5 minutes for questions, and then we'd like to make a few announcements at the end for you to get some additional resources in your startup journey. So if there's any questions, feel free to raise your hand or unmute or use the chat feature.
Everybody asleep? Still awake?
No, everyone's trying to put together their board agenda and their board calendar and all that good stuff. Peyton, you have a question?
No, I was gonna say, Kim, I think I might want to call you offline because all the questions I have are like more specific about our situation, and I'm not sure, the rest of this group is gonna care.
Yeah, no, Peyton, we're overdue. I was gonna say we should meet for coffee or whatever. And
Let's
yeah,
do it.
I think when you, because I have a lot of questions based on your questions, like when we meet, you can tell me the structure of your board and then we can have a more thoughtful conversation.
Yeah, and I'm going, oh my God, I better go reread my bylaws.
Exactly. And if you have counsel, and you're doing board meetings, the counsel should help with what needs to happen.
We do have counsel, but he's awfully expensive. He's a nice guy, but awfully expensive. So
Yeah, well, that's why, I mean, we all learn to be, when you're a startup,
I think you might have froze on us there, Kim. I think you're back now.
What's that?
I think you froze on at least me. I don't know if you froze on anyone else.
Oh.
yeah, I didn't catch a bit of that either.
And no worries. Well, we are getting some good thumbs up on the workshop. We got a fantabulous, and then some great comments in there as well about experience sharing. So thank you, Kim. Any last questions? If not, I can jump into some of those announcements, but want to make space for any questions that you might have.
Been a lot of fun.
All
for
right.
me,
Well,
so I
maybe
appreciate it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'll do a quick announcements, and maybe if there's one last question at the end, but I shared in the chat and I will share it again here just so you all have it, and it's top of or I guess the bottom of the chat. We have, if you're a student here for the Leadership Initiative, please sign in. You can click that first link and share that you are here. want to share a weekly resource called 1 Million Cups. We meet every Wednesday from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Two entrepreneurs present their companies for 6 minutes and then get 20 minutes of Q&A. So definitely plug into that in our local ecosystem. On November 3rd, we'll have a workshop with another one of our fourth wave mentors, Goli Anavari, who will be talking about authentic marketing and marketing through your core values. And then the next three links are all related to Global Entrepreneurship Week. So put November 8th on your calendars. We have over 20 virtual events coming your way that week. Two that I wanted to highlight are Mentor Sacramento Office Hour Sprint, where we'll be doing speed mentoring again. It's an opportunity for you to connect in 3 15-minute mentoring sessions with advisors and people that are in the entrepreneurial space. And then we also are hosting our Spark Venture competition for early stage startups. So those that are working towards getting product market fit. So definitely apply for that. Applications are due on the 27th. So get those applications in and we'll get you dialed in there. And then lastly is just a general link to Global Entrepreneurship Week calendar. We will have events all throughout the week. So definitely plug in there and we hope to see you engaging and more support. And lastly is my email if you have any additional questions or want support from me in the Carlson Center. So I will pause there, see if there's any last questions for Kim or myself. Wanted to say thank you again, Kim, for your experience sharing and sharing your expertise on startup boards. It was a ton of great information, and I know people will be walking away with some tangible tools to use in their own businesses.
All right, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Awesome. All righty. Thank you all. Have a good one. Bye-bye.